Okay, recording is started. Welcome to the study hall for May 8th. And what we're talking about is this critical reasoning. We're going to talk about personalizing the passages. If you don't know what this means, then you will very quickly find out what this means. And this is going to be the topic for the next couple of study halls at least, because there is actually quite the volume of problems for this topic. So we're going to be doing at least 2 or 3 study halls on this topic. So let's do the copyright notice. All of the problems that follow are from the GMAT prep software. They are copyright GMAT. The reason why we are allowed to distribute these problems is that they are free. These are all from the free component of the GMAT prep software. So again, the paid GMAT prep software pack we can't use on here. An official guide we can't use on here, but the free GMAT prep software is a legitimate source to use. Okay, and don't forget where you find multiple choice answers. That's here. So not in the chat box, but there in this window. Please use these choices. Please do not answer in the chat box. Okay, let's go ahead and get started. Let's do a problem. Try that one right there. Okay, so remember how the GMAT works. You have to pick a thing that is a thing. Like you have to pick an answer. You can't not pick an answer. So there's a few of you, there's about 8 of you guys who don't have answers picked. So please pick something if you don't already have one. Okay, so again, let's just hop back to the title page of this, just to make sure that we know what we're talking about. So when we say personalizing the passages, again, I don't know if you guys are new to these sessions or not, but you hear me talk a lot about how you can't really approach these problems from a methodical or formal logic rules-based kind of approach. And this is especially so for passages involving people and their actions or businesses and their actions. Basically, the principle at work here is that when a passage deals with those things, when a passage is about people and their actions or businesses and their actions, because businesses are basically just people at the end of the day, you should insert yourself into the situation. Because by being in the situation, you will immediately understand a whole complex web of interactions that determines the outcome of the situation. So what you should do is think about the situation, think about who the players are, and think about whose role you should play. In other words, it's the exact opposite of objective analysis. What you don't want to do is step outside the situation and try to break it down in some sort of neutral way. You want to put yourself immediately into the situation. And just think of examples, right? Like if you guys do taxes for yourselves, and the tax code seems very complicated and intimidating and so on to an outsider, but if you're the one doing the taxes, then it's a lot easier to understand how all those deductions interact with each other and how the numbers play, because they're your numbers. It just makes more sense to you because it's you. So let's talk about this. So when we talk about personalizing the passages, this is, we're talking about sales, we're talking about, any sort of commercial enterprise like this is ultimately about people and their actions. So when you get that sort of thing, when you get CR passages about people and or businesses, what you should do, and you might want to read the passage twice to do this too, because you might want to browse it the first time just to get oriented to it. What we want to do is ask yourself, who are the players in this situation? In other words, like, whose actions actually matter? And then if you can, what you ideally want to figure out, it's possible, if possible, figure out whose actions matter most, or whose actions determine the outcome of the situation most directly. So you might have to browse this a couple of times to figure this out, but whose actions matter most here? Whose actions determine this? So if you browse it once, you have sales of cereal. And I mean, let me go ahead and write this down on the slide. In order to figure this out, you might want to actually go through the text of the problem twice. Read in quotation marks because it's not a thorough reading both times. Like, it's really just, the first time, just browse quickly, see who's involved, but don't really worry too much about it. Then think about whose actions are most central. Then go back and read the passage as that person or entity. So, in other words, you might need to do 2 reads where the second read is a little bit more. So we've got Angelica in the chat box has named basically all of the players in the situation. So let's think about this for a moment. We have everybody down this whole like manufacturing chain all the way down to the end user. But so we're talking about sales of cereal manufacturers, blah, 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 blah. But if you can tell me, like, in this whole situation, whose actions ultimately determine whose actions ultimately determine what will happen to sales of cereal? Like, ultimately, what does that boil? What does sales ultimately boil down to? Who determines that? Chat box, if you know. Oh, the audio is being weird, okay. Yeah, it's going to be the customer, right? It's not the retailer, because the retailer can put the stuff on their shelves, but that doesn't necessarily mean that it's going to sell, right? It just means that they're putting it on the shelf. So the most important player in this thing eventually is going to be the end consumer, absolutely. So, I mean, just ask yourself, sale or no sale, who does that, who doesn't do that? Go ahead and put something in the chat box so you guys can hear me. I'm wondering if there's any sort of issues with the program. Can you guys hear me? Uh-oh. Okay, if you guys are hearing the chipmunk thing, it's because it's catching back up for some reason. It got behind. Okay, so I know what's going on there. So what we found out, yeah, so read number 1, browse quickly, see who's involved. It's the end consumer is going to be the key player here. So then go back and read this as the consumer. So let's forget the answer choices for a second. Let's just forget it. But let's go ahead and take this to the next page and just talk about this passage from the standpoint of the consumer. So let's just kill the answer choices for the moment. There they go. Okay, so let's translate this. Another thing you probably get used to hearing, another thing you'll get used to hearing me say when you hear me discuss critical reasoning is simplify this, explain this to a 10-year-old. So always do that. You should be able to do that with pretty much any one of these passages. You are the consumer. Okay, so this is just background. If you are the consumer, you don't so much care that overall sales have begun to drop. I mean, you might interpret that as you personally are a little bit more reluctant to buy cereal because it's getting expensive. But ultimately, this is not too critical when it comes to your actions here. But that first sentence, nonetheless, we can still translate it. So cereal's getting expensive. So you are getting more reluctant to buy it. Okay. Now, so here's the thing. If you are putting yourself in the shoes of the consumer, you will immediately see what things are issues here. Like, what does this mean to you as a consumer in language that you can explain to a fourth grader? Somebody tell me in the chat box, what does that orange thing mean to you? And see, it doesn't mean the cost of cereal decreased, though. It doesn't. Remember, you're the consumer. You got to read this more carefully. It doesn't mean that. It doesn't mean that either. I mean, you guys are not reading this carefully enough. There's this word here, which, aha, there we go. Venkat in the chat box captures the idea here. I mean, wholesale is not a thing that you pay because you are the consumer. So I like the way that Venkat wrote this in the chat box here, right? You totally may be unaware that this even happens, right? I mean, you still have to read the words carefully, but you need to be like, aha, wholesale, does this mean anything to me as a consumer? No, it does not. So the store pays less for cereal. Since you are the consumer, you should be looking at those words and saying, so what? I don't care. I'm not the store. So then what should be the next thought? I mean, you'll just have these thoughts if you put yourself in the shoes of the consumer. You'll just have these thoughts. Like, the store pays less, so then, aha, yep, that's the thought you want to have. Exactly. Is it going to be cheaper for me? Well, I don't know that. They didn't go there. So then what they're doing, the last statement, level of overall sales, again, that's a little bit too abstract. Like, a 10-year-old's not going to understand that. But as me, the consumer, that means I have to buy the cereal. I have to buy more cereal. So I'm going to buy more cereal. So this is clearly the issue, and the whole point of this whole personalizing thing is that it becomes much, much clearer that this is the issue. I mean, in fact, if you really do this, and if you continue to read the statements carefully, like if you don't mistake wholesale price for retail price, then it's going to be very clear that this is the key issue here. So that when you get back to the multiple choices, let's just import that onto the screen. Yeah, is it going to be cheaper for me? Absolutely, that's the issue. And sure enough, I mean, the words are a little bit denser and a little bit harder for our hypothetical 10-year-old to understand, but this is pretty much exactly what choice D says. Like, is my price as the consumer going to also go down along with those wholesale prices? Absolutely, yes. This is the issue. So it's the choice that we want. It's pretty cool. I mean, this is not any sort of, I think I lost my microphone. Okay, sound should be back. I mean, this is not any sort of amazing revelation, right? But just when you are in a situation, you are much more able to judge what matters and what doesn't than if you are not in a situation. At least when it's some kind of objective thing. I mean, if there's an emotional component, that's a different story altogether, but this is strict economics, right? So, and also by personalizing the passage, you can also see why the wrong answers are not things, right? Like, if it's A, I don't care. I don't care why cereal prices are high. I'm just mad that they are, and I want them to go back down again. And this doesn't matter at all. I mean, you were looking at this as black letters on a white screen. It's harder to explain away choices like A. But if you make yourself the consumer, you can very clearly see that A does not matter. Whether they use marketing techniques that encourage brand loyalty. Remember, we're talking about averages of the entire cereal market here. So this is just, are people going to buy cereal overall? It doesn't matter which brand they're buying, so I don't care. C, this is also not a thing because the price is the issue. The issue is not lack of variety. The issue is that cereal is really expensive, and that's what makes me reluctant to buy it. So even if there are more kinds out there, I'm still complaining about the price. And then certain types of cereal, remember we're talking about whether I'm going to buy more cereal overall. So B and E wrongly focus on one component of this. But we're talking about overall here. So as far as this goes, Francis, the question in the chat box. I mean, this is what I'm saying about how you need to think very carefully about who is the key player here, like whose actions determine this the most. I mean, a CEO of a company might be able to put some sort of initiative into action, some sort of selling initiative, but at the end of the day, the CEO is not the person whose actions really make the situation go, you know. I mean, and just, if this is not clear in those words, just imagine that you were doing some sort of focus group. Imagine you were in a focus group trying to market a product. I mean, just fill this blank in. What will the blank think? I mean, this is not going to be the CEO, right? This is definitely going to be the shopper. This is going to be the person who's trying to buy the product. So, yeah. Okay. And I mean, even though, Angelica, even that still revolves around the consumer, though. Like, you need to make sure the retailer you're selling to will reflect the price decrease, but the only reason you need to do that is because the consumer will be reluctant to buy if you don't. Like, but that's still an indirect consequence of what we have here. And still results from this same reasoning there. And this is the reason why your retailers have to do that. So ultimately, it still revolves. Yeah, I mean, the customer is always the center of the world because the customer has the money and you have the product, and you want the money and you want to put the product in their hands. So, yeah, that's pretty much how it works. So, I mean, anything about sales rising, you can generalize that. There are very few things that you can generalize on this, but this is one of them. It's kind of neat. All right, let's try another one, unless the word's in green. The color coding is just color coding. Like, this statement is the same color as this, and this is the same color as this, and this is the same color as that. That's all I'm doing there. Like, the colors don't mean anything in particular. It's just, explain this to a 10-year-old is here, and explain that to a 10-year-old is here, and explain that to a 10-year-old is here. Hanki, I'm not sure that that's really helpful in judging this kind of thing, so it seems like a distraction. Well, I mean, it would be facts, because, I mean, sales have begun to drop is very clearly a factual observation. I mean, it's data, but I'm not seeing how this is going to help us solve the problem. So, yeah. You could suggest a way. Well, if it says because of, then because of means because of. I mean, you can't distrust the words that are there. So if it says cause and effect, then you can take their word for it. Because the words have to be true. Otherwise everything will be worth nothing, right? Okay. Let's try another one. Clear out those answers. Try this. All right, everybody pick a thing that is a thing. Remember that it's GMAT. GMAT doesn't let you not answer the questions. So, you gotta answer the questions. All right, let's go ahead and pick an answer choice. Still about 12 of you who don't have one. In the meantime, while we still have stragglers filling in answers here, let's talk about what we talked about before, which is who's the key player here. And you don't really have to spell out all of the players involved. You just have to browse it, and then you'll notice that this is an argument about whether absentee rates will go down. Okay, what does it mean for an absentee rate to go down? That means that who has to do what? What does that mean? But it's not just employees, right? It's which ones. Yeah, it's the ones who actually do miss work, like more than vanishingly rarely. You know, it's just like if you're talking about crime rates going down, you have to be talking about criminals, or at least potential criminals, not committing crimes anymore. It's not random people. So same sort of thing. Like, in other words, the people who are most often absent have to be absent less often. So this is entirely an issue of their actions. In other words, the people who are the chronic absentees here. So I mean, the employer cares the most about the success of the plan, but this is not really the question. I mean, the person who cares the most is not what we're after here. What we're after is just whose actions make or break how this happens. Right, it has nothing to do with who cares the most about it. Like, let's say that I make a $5 million bet on some high school football game. You know, then I probably care about that game a lot more than the players do. But whether I win or lose my bet has nothing to do with me. It has everything to do with the people on the field and what they do. So, I mean, we're not talking about who has the most invested. It's not what we're talking about. The issue is not, yeah, please don't type answers in the chat box, guys. Multiple choice answers are underneath your name. The issue is not who has the most capital invested, where capital is money, but also emotional capital and stuff like that. That's not the point. The issue is who is the cause if this is the effect. Like, you just think about betting $5 million on some inconsequential high school football game. I mean, the football players are still the cause of the outcome, not me with my $5 million bet. I mean, I care about it a lot, but that's not the point. So just keep that in mind, because the employer's actions ultimately are not that deterministic here. It's the way that the absentees respond to it. So you are a person who be one of the absentees. Which one of these choices affects you? So, well, this doesn't really seem to have anything to do with you. I mean, this means you might randomly take a nap, but that doesn't have much to do with skipping work. But if you look at choice B is total home run here, right? Like, this means this is you. This means that you, the chronic absentee, are not going to do it. Yeah, that would definitely weaken this argument. In fact, it would pretty much destroy this argument completely. And by personalizing it, it's much easier to see the relevance. You know, the absentee rate is a function of you showing up or not showing up, is the point. This one, again, no connection to you as one of the chronic absentees. We don't know who these people are. We don't know if they are coming into work or not coming into work or skipping work. We don't know. Same thing, this has no relevance to you as one of the chronic absentees. And E, people might be taking a little bit of minutes on the end of their lunch break, but that's not the same thing as taking sick leave, which is what we're concerned with here. So, immediate relevance, one choice. The other choices aren't even that relevant. It's a pretty powerful tool. So, take some time if you have to take it to see who the key players are here. But, yes. Okay. I don't know what this teleconference thing is. What do I know what that means? Someone joined the room as a teleconference. Don't have a clue what that is. Okay. Any other questions about this? I see a couple of you have some text in your chat box. So, difficulty levels, I don't really answer questions about those because there's no possible benefit in answering such questions. And in fact, just consider the fact that you have to ask me this. The fact that you have to ask this means that you have no idea what the difficulty level is, which means it could not possibly be helpful because you don't know it. And there would be no reason to worry about that. It might just bring negative returns if you do think about it, because it's a distraction from solving the problem. It's a big distraction too. So just don't think about it. There's exactly one group of people who should care about that, and that's people who write the GMAT. But it does a nice job of distracting people. So yeah, don't let them knock you off the wagon. Okay, some people still have text in their chat boxes, but let's try to move on. If there are questions on this, I'll just go ahead and catch them later. Clear out your answers here. Here's another problem. Give it a shot. All right, let's pick something. Let's pick one of the choices, please. So about 15 of you guys. Okay, let's go ahead and get going on this. Still about 8 of you don't have answers, but we gotta go ahead and move on here. So, scan it. You've got people wearing nicotine patches who are trying to quit smoking. You've got doctors. You have these used to be prescriptions, now they're not. And then we're talking about sales again. Who's the key player? Whose actions are the cause if this is going to be an effect? Boosting sales. Whose actions make that happen? Be that person. Yeah, it's the consumer again. I mean, pretty much when it comes to sales, it's going to be the people who have to shell out the money for this stuff, right? It's going to be the point of sale. So, be the consumer, smoker. Basically, then boost sales suddenly becomes so much more concrete. Because I mean, boost sales is annoyingly abstract. A little bit too abstract for my mind to think about. And it's not real. It's not concrete. It's like random statistic. At least my brain has a hard time wrapping itself around that. But if you make yourself a smoker, then this means you are more likely to buy the thing. This is very concrete. This is much easier to think about. Our brains like things that are concrete. This is something that a 10-year-old could understand, which again is the goal of getting through the text here. So, what's going on here? So you read this again as the smoker who may or may not be buying a nicotine patch. So the first sentence is just background facts telling you what the deal is, that nicotine patch is a way of like substituting for cigarettes to wean you off of it. But okay, so here's what they are changing. Starting next month, you used to have an RX for these things, but now you don't. So what's changing, what's new, is that I'm not going to need a prescription anymore. That's the only thing that's changing, so somehow this has to change my behavior, right? So there must have been something, so you can think right now, because if you're personalizing this, you can actually think ahead, even if you haven't gotten through all the text yet. I mean, this is the only thing that's changing. So what this means is that for this argument to work, something about not having to get a prescription must drive my behavior. Because nothing else is different. And you can just think this all out ahead of time. It's pretty sweet. It's kind of like in the last problem with the wholesale price versus the retail price. By the time you got to that line, you already knew what the issue was because you were the consumer and you were like, dude, this is not my price. Same sort of thing here. It's got to be something about getting prescription. So it's still going to, because it's still going to cost just as much money. So money is not an issue. So as the smoker, I'm going to read this as I don't care about the money because it's the same, and I don't care about the effectiveness because it's the same. Those things can't possibly drive my behavior because they're not different. So cost is the same, so this can't change my behavior. And effectiveness is the same, so it can't change my behavior. It's got to be something about having to get a prescription. So this is very, very exact. I mean, you can pretty much tell exactly what it's going to be. You need an answer choice that says, basically, prescription means I won't buy. Non-prescription means I'll do it, or at least I'll be more likely to. I'll do it, maybe an exaggeration, but at least I'll consider it. It's pretty good. Prescription means I won't do it. Non-prescription means I will do it. Okay, let's check the choices for that. This is saying that the nicotine patch is not total garbage, but this is not necessarily telling me that I'm going to do it now. Same thing, they cost more to use than other things, but I already know how expensive it is, so this is not changing the landscape of anything. Same thing, there are other things aimed at helping people quit. But we're not talking about whether I will buy those other things. We're talking about whether I will buy this patch. Ah, look at this, though. See, I don't think I can go see the doctor that does this, right? Because to get this prescription, I would have to do this, and I don't feel like I can afford this. Because even though the cost of the thing itself is the same, there's this added cost of the doctor visit that's putting me off of it. So if I don't need to do that anymore, I guess I'll just go get this patch. Okay. And then, last but not least, rates of success. This is actually a lot like choice A, where they talk about how effective or not effective it is at the end of the day, but we're just talking about whether I will buy it and try it. We're not talking about whether it will actually wean me off of cigarettes. So you guys are pretty good as a group on this one. So it doesn't seem like there's a ton of questions here. If you do have questions, feel free to post them. If not, let me find another one here that's interesting. Let's say, how about that one? Try that. Okay, lots of people don't have answers to this one yet. In fact, most people. So take another 15 or 20 seconds if you need to. Alrighty, let's start talking about this here. So what are we talking about? Well, we're talking about converting landscaping in your yard. So who's the player here? I mean, ultimately, this is about whose action. Is it going to be all homeowners? Or is it only going to be some of them? Yeah, it's just going to be the people with yards. See, so if you're saying brochure, maybe the word brochure is not, maybe you're not made under that word, but a brochure is like a pamphlet or like a flyer that the company puts out to advertise stuff. So, I mean, brochure is not a person. So that can't be a player here in the problem. But, yeah, it's just people with yards. So, people who don't have yards are completely irrelevant to this thing. So, notice that we can knock off choice C right now, because this is entirely a function of the choice made by people with yards. And ultimately, this situation revolves around whether homeowners with yards will install the new stuff, the new landscape. So you need to be a homeowner with a yard. Okay, that's you. Let's read this passage again as you're a homeowner with a yard. Okay, so the story here is, they want me to switch landscapes. Now, they want me to put in a whole new landscape. Take out my current landscape and put in a whole new one, water-saving one. You know, like to take out grass and flowers and stuff and put in like succulents and cactus plants and stuff like that, desert plants. And they're saying that it's a money-saving thing. So this immediately narrows down what I need to think about. I only need to think about dollars and cents because they narrowed it down right there. It saves you money. And I mean, I'm not disagreeing with it being natural or attractive, which means that the only point at issue here is saving me money. So I need to think about dollars and cents. Okay. Sure. So, well, the criticism is whether I'm saying this or not, it applies to me, right? Like, the water savings is only about $20 a year. It's only around $20 a year. Okay, well, it's still $20 a year, so why am I reluctant? Because, I mean, if it was saving $20 a year versus not saving $20 a year, then, of course, I would want to save $20 a year. I mean, it's a small number, but it's still better to save it than not to. So, like, what weighs against this that is the problem? Like, what goes the other way? Like why is this an issue in the first place? Chat box. Yeah, the conversion costs money, right? You got to catch that when I mean, if you're a homeowner watching your wallet and you're personalizing this, you are certainly going to catch this, right? The expense of new, aha, right? So, I mean, you can just use common sense to figure out that it's going to cost a lot more than $20 to landscape an entire yard. So, the cost of putting in new landscaping is more than $20. I don't know what it is, but it's clearly more than $20. So that looks like a net loss. So what rebuttal of the criticism means it has to not be a net loss. Like, in other words, I actually have to gain after all from doing this. So what do I need? I mean, what do I need for this to not be a net loss? I have to find something that is a what? Somewhere. I need to find something else to put me back into positive money, right? So like that's what I need. And as the homeowner with the yard, it is so much easier to see this than it is as random words on the screen, right? So I need some other savings somewhere associated with this plan, absolutely. It has to be some other, either like, some additional savings or some other cost associated with not switching. So it's going to be one of those two things, right? It's either going to be additional savings directly or a hidden cost of not switching. In other words, a cost that I would save by switching. Those are the only two ways that could really work, right? It's either going to be savings or it's going to be not paying what I would have, which is still savings, I guess. So this, even homeowners whose yards do not have these, this is basically saying everybody can do this by putting stuff in their house, like putting a shower head in that uses less water or a toilet. But this has nothing to do with whether I should install stuff in my yard. So this is not a thing. Look at that, hidden cost of a conventional landscape. Right, a conventional landscape. This means that if I do switch over, the way you should read this is not a conventional landscape requires a greater expenditure. You should read this as if I switch over to the new thing, then I'm going to save money on fertilizer and herbicide. So this is exactly what I need. And they don't give you the dollars and cents. They don't prove that it outweighs the cost of this, but it's the only choice that provides something else in that column of your ledger, so to speak. We already got rid of C because it has nothing to do with me at all. I mean, C, it has to do with people who are specifically not me. So it's not a thing. D was one of the popular choices. Like a lot of you guys have switched your answers over to B now in your multiple choice thing, but D was the other really popular choice that people picked in this problem. The problem with D is that I'm not making a decision between these straight up. Right? Like I don't have an empty backyard and deciding which of these to put in starting from nothing. That would be when this was relevant. The problem is that I already have this stuff there. So it's not the cost, it's not apples and oranges, it's not apples and apples here. It's I don't need to compare the cost of new this to new that. I just need to think about the loss entailed in converting it. Right. So yeah, it's a conversion. D ignores the fact that you have to do a conversion cost. So exactly, if it was a totally new thing that you were building, then you would have to think about this. And then E is some homeowners are pretty much profligate with their use of water, but that the comparison does not help me figure out costs and benefits of making a switch. So then, Kat, what you should do is something like that is you should try it and just see how it works out for you. Because, I mean, that's going to be a different thing from person to person. Now, let me make what sounds like a dumb analogy, but you'll see where I'm going with it. Like, let's say that you and your, significant other have different cars and you go to the airport together in one car. Yeah, and then let's say you thought you took your significant other's car to the airport, but you actually took yours. So you get back home from your trip and you go to the parking lot and you're looking for their car, but it's actually your car that's there. Okay, where I'm going with this is there are some people who would just go around the parking lot over and over and over again and would not notice their own car, because they would be too busy looking for the other one. And there would be others who would be looking for the other one, but they would see theirs, and they'd be like, oh, hey, that's mine. So that's what I mean. Like the first type of person would be so set on looking for one kind of answer choice that they would not notice another one. And that kind of person, it would probably be a bad idea to make a prediction, because you might be blinded to other choices. But if you are the other type of person where you would still see your car, the analogy there would be you would still see other correct options even though you had one prediction in mind. So that you need to play with it and see, right? It's just different people have different degrees of, like we call it tunnel vision, like where you're just blinded to all other options, right? If you have that happen, then you may want to be cautious with making predictions. But if you still have a flexible mindset, then that's not what you ever heard. Well, thanks. I'm glad it was effective. Right, but it's like that. I mean, different people have different levels of that, and it might even be different with different times of day too. Like I know for me it is. Like right when I wake up, if I don't see exactly what I'm looking for, I'm just not going to see stuff. But later in the day, I'm a little bit more flexible, more creative. So you might have to think that over and stuff like that. So yeah, Fabulous, that's the idea, but different people are capable of that inherently to different extents, and you got to learn to play with your strengths, right? Okay. Let's not so much the car at the airport, but I've had a lot of similar thingies, for sure. Okay, there's your scientific term of the day, thingies. Let's take a look at another problem. How about, there's one I'm looking for that, let's see. How about this? You may be confused by what this is doing in a unit on personalizing passages, but try to roll with it. Oh, right. So, let's pick something. So if you guys still haven't picked a thing. So, go ahead and pick a thing. Okay. All right. There's still a number of you guys don't have a choice picked here, but let's just try to. In fact, probably like 15 of you with no answer right now. But who's the key player here? Try not to be super, I guess, androcentric here. Yeah, the wolves, right? I mean, you can be the wolf. Sure, why not? I mean, because, in fact, with prey animals, it's probably even easier to personalize that, because realistically speaking, the only real drives that you're going to have there are, food and reproduction and maybe shelter and not really much else, right? Like, as opposed to something like a consumer with landscaping, there's all kinds of issues there. There's like environmental sensitivity, there's cost, there's attractiveness, there's gray water, there's who the heck knows, right? There's just so many things. So in fact, ironically, it might be even, I don't know if animalized instead of personalized, but it might be easier, right? So, what date frame? Not, you mean the 1910, 1915? Not so much. Remember, they don't make these like quant problems, so you're not really going to have to play around too much with numbers of any sort here. But yeah, be the wolf. Yeah, I mean, because the wolf attacks on sheep. I mean, why are you attacking the sheep? Well, yeah, we want to know. So let's just make sure that we understand the passage. So the sheep, I mean, the deal is that we normally avoid humans. It doesn't say why. Maybe we just hate them. Maybe we think they smell bad. Who knows? I mean, I think it actually might be the smell bad thing. Because you know how cowboys put boots up on fences and stuff. And just the smell of the boot is enough to keep coyotes away. So, yeah, all right. So we don't normally... we stay away from humans. We just don't like them. It doesn't say why, and who cares. We're haters. We just don't like them. So, some of us got close to the sheep and ate them. So then they started shooting us. And then after they started shooting us, which doesn't really seem to make a whole lot of sense, right? After they started shooting us, we attacked more of their sheep. Okay, so remember that you are a wolf, right? I mean, this could be some Romeo and Juliet, avenging the blood of your family thing, but animals don't really have revenge. Right? It's not really a thing. So, that's it, man. This means war. Well, wolves don't have that. So, all that kind of human stuff is off the table, right? There's no avenging your brother's death if you're a wolf. So we need to think about food and reproduction and survival, and that's kind of it, right? So that's what we want to know, right? I mean, this makes no sense to me. I mean, like, why are my fellow wolves going after sheep more now that they're being shot? That doesn't make a lot of sense. Like, why are they going right into the line of fire? That doesn't make a lot of sense. Because again, yeah, it's not revenge, right? If it was a human thing, then that could be a reasonable thing. But wolves, animals. So yeah, I mean, easier prey. You might be able to anticipate what the answer is going to say if you really put yourself into the frame of the wolf, right? It must have something to do with an easy catch. I mean, it does tell you at the very beginning of the passage that sheep are an easy catch. It does say that they are easy. So the easiness must have something to do with it. So, I mean, without even looking at the choices yet, you're looking for something like the easiness of catching the sheep becomes more important than the danger of being shot. It's got to be something, I mean, because these wolves are not totally acting with baselessly. So let's take a look. So this would make no sense at all. Like, if our prey is increasing in population, then this would be even more stupid, because we could just go after those. So that doesn't make any sense. This one, I mean, this is not going to judge. I mean, we are not subject to the law, right? We're wolves. I mean, wolves don't have courts and stuff like that, so we don't care. This means my fellow wolves are injured and cannot do, like, real hunting anymore. So they have to go after, like, sheep, which is the easy targets. And that's all they can get. I mean, yes, they're going right into the line of human fire, but it's either that or they starve to death. So this is it. Be the wolf, and you understand. We kind of already knew this, so it says they're easy prey. D is just repeating the idea that they're easy prey. If you just repeat ideas, then it doesn't help us. So, and then Minhouse, I'm confused because you said Y, B, but the answer is not B. And then E says that some of the other wolves in my group moved away from the people into, like, the middle of Wyoming or something, but I don't care why those guys did. I mean, we're talking about the ones who didn't leave and the ones who are actually attacking sheep. So, well, but C and D don't have similar reasoning if you think about it. Like, D just repeats what they already have said, which is that it's easy for us to hunt sheep. But C says that when you get shot, you can't hunt real game anymore, and you have to go after sheep. No, you can, because D says nothing about weakening our ability to hunt. Like that's only introduced by choice C. And choice D, you don't know that. It takes away that whole thing of being injured and not being able to do normal hunting. I mean, according to D, D says we got an easy target here, but according to D, we might still be able to do normal hunting. That's the problem there. Okay. Yeah, you should always recommend reading the question first. Yeah, absolutely. Because if you don't read the question part first, then you don't really have a goal. You you always want to know what you're trying to do. So in this case, you're looking for some weird thing that you have to explain, so it helps to get a handle on that. Because once you have a handle on that, you have a focus point as you go through these words here, which is all important. You got to have a goal. So in short, the answer is yes. Okay, so yeah, personalizing can include putting yourself into the shoes of an animal, which ironically might be simpler because all you have to worry about is that sort of hindbrain stuff, reproduction, sleep, food, survival. There's not any of the more complex motivations that sometimes characterize human actions. So that's always nice. Oops, didn't mean to do that. Okay, here. Let's do another one. Venkat, I don't know if I would say that they're different. I mean, if you were in a focus group, think about what the very first thing you would do as a focus group would be. I mean, in fact, if you think about, maybe a focus group was, when I said that earlier, a focus group is usually a group of consumers when it's a product. I mean, a focus group is the same as the person who is the key player, which is why it's called a focus group. So there's usually no distinction there at all. But even if instead of a focus group, even if you're talking about like a group conducting a study, still, the first thing that a group conducting a study is going to do is do exactly what we're doing and say who is the key player and what do they want. So, yeah, absolutely. I mean, I don't think that's really a distinction. I think that's basically two ways of looking at the same thing. So it's either personalize it or be someone else who would personalize it anyway, in other words. Okay, let's try this one. And hopefully it's opening a few eyes here as to the value of a totally non-objective way to look at these passages. I mean, a lot of people try to be very analytical about stuff, but there's many more insights. The timing especially is a thing, right? Like the fact that you have to do these things in a short period of time. That's why personalizing is so valuable, because you don't have a lot of time. And when someone is personally in a situation, they can usually size up the situation instantly, as opposed to analytical approaches, which can sometimes be thorough and can sometimes take important stuff into account, but they usually take a long time to figure that out. You guys don't have a lot of time. I think that's the primary value of this sort of approach, is that you can size up the situation really quickly because you're doing it almost instinctively. All right, try this one. Remember, this is the question part of the question. So think about what that means in terms of players and decision makers and stuff like that. Okay, so it looks like we need some more time as a group here. So take another 30 seconds or so, maybe 40 seconds. I'm not going to start a new timer, but give it a shot. Okay, it's time to sort of grip it and rip it here. Time to pick an answer. Time to pick a thing that is a thing. In the meantime, while people are busy picking things who have not yet picked things that are things, does anyone want to tell me what that green thing means? For there to be a market. What does that mean to a 10-year-old? Yeah, demand. Okay, Francis, there you go. You have to have somebody who wants to buy the thing. I mean, a 10-year-old doesn't know what demand means. I mean, really, I'm not kidding about the 10-year-old thing. If you could explain this in terms that a fourth grader could totally buy, good. I mean, demand is still very, very abstract. I mean, to the point where, honestly, if you took students in an Econ 1 course, you could probably tell them almost anything about, quote, demand, unquote, and most of them would believe you. Because it's just too abstract. A lot of people don't use common sense, you know. But if you told them facts about, oh, this person would or would not want to buy something, then they would start thinking more normally about it. So, yeah, demand is still a little bit on the abstract side here. Let's go with people want to buy it. So, I mean, the player here is definitely going to be the person who wants to buy it. So be the person who might want to buy the chip. Okay, and then you need to decide what's going to make you want to buy it. So there's pros and there's cons. Okay, what are those? Well, what's the pro? Remember to explain it to a fourth grader. What's the pro? What's the con? The pro is that what? The pro is that radiation will not affect. So if your chip gets hit by radiation, it won't be affected. It will just say whatever and keep working. That's what it'll say. I bet you didn't know chips could talk. Right. Okay. That's pretty much the only pro. There's two cons. What are they? It's slow and it has fewer parts, which is probably the reason why it's slow, but they present these as though they were separate things, so let's just go ahead and present them as separate things. Okay, so I mean, here's common sense here. If you want to buy something, I mean, this needs to be important to you, because otherwise you're not going to want the trade-offs. And there's the cost is not described here, so maybe you take trade-offs for a savings in cost, but they don't discuss that. And then, as far as the cons go, I mean, it's like anything else. You have to be okay with this, too. I mean, it's really like pros and cons of anything else. I mean, if I have a car that is awesome looking but guzzles gas, then I have to want a car that looks awesome, otherwise that wouldn't do it for me. And I have to be okay with spending more money on gas. I mean, this is all pretty much common sense. But it's hard to deploy common sense unless you put yourself in the shoes of the big player here. So let's look for these things here, because remember there's going to be 4 answers that do answer the problem here, and 1 that doesn't because it just accepts here. So the yellow part, this has to matter to you. It should be essential. So we have to care that it is radiation proof. So B is that, so we can strike B out because remember it's an accept problem where you don't want the choices that do answer the question. If this is important, then I mean, for this to matter, it has to be better than the chips that are currently out there, right? Like if B was false, then I would just buy the chips that are already on the market rather than this new weird one. And then C is also a thing because C says there might be radiation in the first place. If there is not, then I don't care about this fancy trait of these chips. Now, what about D? I mean, what does D mean? Yeah, it says the other parts of a device can withstand radiation too. If that's false, then if that's not true, then yeah, that's exactly what Angelica is saying there. If I'm thinking about buying this, like imagine a particular device, right? Imagine that you're putting this into, I mean, I can't immediately think of anything where you're going to be in intense radiation. So I don't know, let's say you're going to go listen to a stereo in Chernobyl, because I can't think of anything better than that. So yeah, microwave is probably a better analogy, but let's go with a stereo in Chernobyl anyway, just for fun. And yeah, old nuclear accident site. What D says is that none of the other components in your stereo are going to work anyway, so your stereo is going to be a wreck no matter what happens. I mean, or your microwave. Thank you for, it's a lot better than what I came up with. It means that the rest of your device is not going to work at all, right? I mean, so who cares if your central chip can withstand radiation because the rest of your device is going to fall apart. So this also has to be true. So these are all yellow, because those are all things that have to be true for this to make any difference to anybody. And then as far as the orange color, I mean, you have to not care about speed, which is pretty much what A says. So there. Now, they're being sort of nice to you with the choices here, because usually when there's a problem like this, you have 4 things that go the right way, and you normally have 1 thing that kind of just doesn't go anyway. You have 1 thing that's just irrelevant. But in this problem, they're actually giving you a choice E that goes totally the other way. Like, what does this mean? What's the consequence of this? If manufacturers can protect the chips from radiation, then what? Sure, yeah. I mean, because what stops mattering in that case? Like, why? I mean, I think you guys are hitting it without really saying it, without really articulating it. I think you don't need a new one because what will never happen in the first place. To make sure we're on the same page here. I mean, you're not going to buy it because your chip is not ever going to. Yeah, there's no exactly. It's what Minha says. Minha S, I think that probably is. I mean, you're not ever going to see radiation in the first place if this is true. Remember, the whole point of your chip is that when it encounters radiation, it will be able to shrug it off like Chuck Norris. But the problem is that if E is true, then your chip will never see radiation in the first place, and so therefore your purported advantage is not actually an advantage at all. So yeah, exactly. It's kind of like saying I have a car that will protect you in a head-on crash. But then you only drive on one-way streets, so you will never get into a head-on crash in the first place, which means that this is irrelevant. And again, if you are the person who is thinking about paying money for this, it will just become all so much more relevant. You know, the hard part is getting yourself to do that, getting yourself to care about switches on a chip while you take a test. That may not be the easiest thing for everyone to insert themselves, but you gotta try. All right, so we're going to do more of these. We probably got a solid 2 or 3 more study halls worth of these problems where you can personalize arguments. Because you can see here that they span all question types. Notice one thing we kind of didn't really do at all today is talk about question types and stuff. Because if you can really personalize it, you don't have to do that stuff. Like the classifying stuff is more plan B if you can't really intuit the question to enough of a degree. But if you can understand exactly what's going on and exactly what the question says you should be thinking about, then you don't need to classify. You can just think about it. So just keep that in mind. We are done. I'm going to go ahead and kill the recording here in a moment. And thank you. Thank you for attending. Good night and good luck. Yes, the next study hall is actually next week on the 15th. It's a week from today. And there's going to be a longer hiatus after that. Thanks for the reminder. Okay, good night and good luck.